I don't remember the exact moment I stopped flinching when they laughed at me. Maybe it was the day I brought a keyboard instead of a notebook to class. Or maybe it was the way their voices rose together, like a bad harmony, when I answered the instructor's question with too much confidence. "Bold," one of them muttered. Not admiringly. I should have known then. This place wasn't built for people like me. But I didn't come to be liked. I came because I had something to prove. To them, yes, but more importantly, to myself. See, you don't walk into a boot camp at 32 with a mortgage, a kid in year 2, and a CV full of customer service gigs unless you're desperate or determined. I was both. And from day one, they clocked me as an intruder. Too old, too female, too soft-spoken. I became the punchline before I could even finish my first line of code. "You sure you know what a semicolon is?" smirked Josh, the kind of guy who pronounces GitHub like it's a flex. I smiled. The trick was to let them underestimate me. Let them misjudge the silence for ignorance, because while they preened and one-upped each other with fancy frameworks they barely understood, I was watching, learning. Not just the code, but them. Their tells, their blind spots. The way arrogance always trips over its own ego. The instructor, Ron, was no better. Polite to the point of condescension. "Give her time," he once told the class, like I wasn't sitting 3 feet away. She's probably more comfortable with Excel macros than REST APIs. The laughter that followed wasn't loud, but it was sharp, like stepping on a shard of glass in your own kitchen. I went home that day and cried in the bathroom so my daughter wouldn't hear. But then, I opened my laptop and kept going. Every night, while they posted memes in the group chat about junior dev fails, I was dissecting open-source projects line by line, refactoring sample apps for fun, writing pseudocode in my head while brushing my teeth. 2 months in, we were assigned our final group project, build a mock CRM for a fictional client using everything we'd learned. The class buzzed with energy, everyone jockeying for position like it was a startup IPO. Josh predictably took the lead. Self-declared architect. I was assigned data entry interface, read the boring bit. Fine, let them play CEO. I'd be the janitor, I'd clean up the mess later. Week 1 of the build was chaos wrapped in caffeine, mismatched libraries, broken merge requests, ego-driven decisions. Josh dismissed every suggestion I made with a nod so patronizing I swear it came with a baby pacifier. "That's cute," he said once, when I flagged a security flaw in the auth flow. "We'll patch it later." Spoiler, they didn't. It was on a Thursday, 3 days before final demo, that everything finally imploded. The latest build crashed. Hard. The back-end team blamed the front-end. The front-end blamed the database schema. Josh blamed technical debt, which was ironic because he had the coding debt of a first-year comp sci dropout. I kept my head down and quietly copied the entire repo to my machine. No one noticed. They were too busy pointing fingers. That night, I made a decision. Not out of revenge, not even out of pride, but because I couldn't let them present that wreck and have it reflect me. I owed myself more. I owed my daughter more. I put her to bed with a story, kissed her forehead, and told her I'd be working late. She didn't ask why. She just said, "Don't forget your tea this time, Mummy." The clock said 8:37 p.m. I brewed a pot, cracked my knuckles, and opened VS Code. First, I rewrote the database structure. Simplified, normalized. Then, I rebuilt the API endpoints with proper auth, adding token expiration and refresh logic. I restructured the front end from that Frankenstein pile of spaghetti into modular React components. I didn't sleep. I didn't eat. The sun came up and I was still testing edge cases. By 6:23 a.m., it was done. Faster, leaner, secure, functional, a real product, not just a passable student project. I zipped the build and sent it to Ron with a note. If the team's version doesn't work, try this. I knew what would happen next, or I thought I did. That morning, class started with the usual awkward silence and overcompensating bravado. Josh swaggered to the front like he was pitching to investors on Dragon's Den, but the app wouldn't load. Database error. Again. Ron frowned. Josh restarted the server. Still broken. Someone suggested switching to my version, half joking. Ron turned to me. Did you really build your own version overnight? I built our version, just working. He raised an eyebrow. Let's see it then. I plugged in, loaded it up. Flawless. Even had user roles and session tracking. Josh stared at the screen like it had betrayed him. This isn't what we agreed on, he stammered. No, I said. This is what works. The silence that followed was the kind that fills rooms right before applause or a fistfight. Ron clicked through the app slowly. Did you do this all on your own? I nodded. From scratch? No, I replied. From necessity. I half expected Ron to scold me for going rogue, for not being a team player. Instead, he said, You just saved the demo. Josh opened his mouth, closed it. For once, he had nothing to say. Word spread fast. Suddenly, I wasn't just the Excel lady. I was the woman who rewrote the software overnight. The tone shifted. Not dramatically, but enough. Fewer smirks, more questions. How'd you handle state management? Mind if I look at your API logic? I didn't gloat, didn't snap. I shared what I could, not because they deserved it, but because I had earned my place, and I wasn't about to sink to their level. Later that week, Ron pulled me aside. You ever consider teaching? He asked. Not formally, I replied. Why? He smiled. Because most people code to impress. You code to solve. That's rarer than you think. I thought of my daughter, of the tears, of the tea I forgot to drink. Maybe, I said. But first, I've got some job applications to send. You might think that's where the story ends, but it doesn't. Because 6 months later, I got a call from a startup. Said they'd seen a version of a CRM app built at a bootcamp. Said they'd love to know the person who wrote it, so I told them. And then I asked if they needed a team lead. They said yes. I said I'd bring my own semicolon. You ever try to pretend you're not glowing from the inside out? Like you've just quietly knocked over a building with your pinky finger, and now you're supposed to sit politely and sip coffee? That was me, the morning after the presentation. I walked in thinking maybe a few people would nod at me differently. Instead, half the class looked like they'd seen a ghost. The other half looked like they were reconsidering their entire life trajectory. Josh didn't speak to me, not even once. Which was funny, because he talked non-stop before. About syntax, startups, his precious dev blog. Now, just silence. He wasn't the threat anymore. I was. But here's the part no one prepares you for. Winning can be lonely. The victory? It tasted like validation, and something else. Like standing on a summit you climbed alone. I kept telling myself I didn't care. I wasn't here for applause. But deep down, I wanted someone, just one person, to say, that was badass. That someone turned out to be Sasha. She was always quiet in the corner, buried in headphones, sleeves covered in ink. We'd barely exchanged more than 5 words before. That day, she walked past me, paused, then muttered, "Thanks for breaking the matrix." Then she kept walking. And just like that, I wasn't alone anymore. We started talking more about code, about burnout, about the absurdity of imposter syndrome. Turns out Sasha used to work at a top design firm. Quit after her manager told her she was too intense for client meetings. She smiled when she said it, but her jaw tightened. I knew that look. The quiet rage of being dismissed one too many times. We were from different worlds, but carried the same bruises, and like magnets, we found each other. The final weeks of boot camp were a blur. Interviews, hackathons, career panels. I got invited to one because someone on LinkedIn saw the CRM project. The irony? It was a panel on diversity in tech. They wanted me to sit beside Josh. I said yes, not out of spite, out of strategy. The room was filled with recruiters, HR reps, and a handful of nervous juniors clutching their CVs like life rafts. Josh opened with a monologue about disruption. I countered with a story about making my first API call while boiling spaghetti for my daughter's dinner. The audience laughed. Genuinely. Because here's the secret. Real stories stick. Buzzwords don't. After the panel, a woman in a sharp blazer pulled me aside, said she ran a mid-sized SaaS firm looking to diversify their dev team, not just in background, but in mindset. We have enough tech bros. We want someone who gets users, who builds with empathy. I raised an eyebrow. You mean someone who's written code while nursing a sick kid? She smiled. Exactly. They offered me a contract that same week. Not junior, not trainee, mid-level with path to senior in 6 months. I accepted. I should have been ecstatic. But something gnawed at me. Not doubt, not guilt, more like unfinished business. Because while I moved forward, the system that almost broke me stayed exactly the same. The bootcamp kept churning out devs, still mostly male, still mostly smug, still prizing performance over perseverance. I thought about Sasha, about the other women who'd whispered thanks when no one was looking. I knew I couldn't fix everything, but maybe, just maybe, I could leave the ladder down. So I went back, volunteered to mentor the next cohort, showed them how to build an app. Then showed them how to survive the environment, taught them to spot gaslighting in code reviews, to take up space, to document everything, because receipts matter. One night, Sasha and I stayed late helping a new student debug her portfolio app. She was in tears, said her code was trash, that she'd never get hired. I sat beside her, looked at the spaghetti mess of functions, and smiled. You ever seen a sculpture made from scrap? She blinked. What? It's messy, sharp edges, doesn't look like much at first, but you shape it, weld it, give it a name. Suddenly it's art. That's what code is. That's what you are. She wiped her face, nodded, and kept going. I don't tell that story to brag. I tell it because it's easy to think moments like that don't matter, that unless you're launching the next unicorn app, you're just a blip. But I've seen the ripple effect. One person rewriting one app in the middle of the night can change how an entire class sees itself, can shift who gets to speak, who gets to lead. A few weeks later, Ron approached me again. He looked different, humbled. You remember that suggestion you made about adding peer review to team projects? I nodded. We're doing it, and, we'd like you to help write the rubric. That moment hit different. Not because I'd finally earned his respect, but because change had a paper trail now, something that might last after me. The night before I started my new job, I couldn't sleep. Not from nerves, from anticipation. I stayed up rereading the codebase they'd sent me, highlighting gaps, drafting notes, planning documentation. That's when it hit me. I wasn't scared anymore. Not of failing, not of not belonging. Somewhere between their laughter and my late-night push to Git, I'd rewritten more than just the app. I'd rewritten who I was allowed to be. And I wasn't done. Not even close. The first day at the new job was exactly what you'd expect. Keycards that didn't work, awkward handshakes, and coffee that tasted like printer ink. I wore my favorite blazer, the one with slightly frayed cuffs but strong shoulders, because that's how I felt. Worn, but unbreakable. My new team was polite, diverse, and slightly dazed. Startups are like that, always on the brink of brilliance or burnout. The code base was better than expected, but still riddled with assumptions. I made notes, asked questions no one had thought to ask. Why is this endpoint exposed? Who's monitoring the failover logs? What happens when a user's session times out mid-transaction? My manager, Priya, watched me closely. She was sharp, quiet, never wasted a word. At the end of the day, she pulled me aside. You ask questions like someone who's cleaned up a lot of messes. I laughed. You could say that. She nodded. Good. We need that. In that moment, I realized something. I wasn't the underdog here. I wasn't even the dark horse. I was the cavalry. Over the next few weeks, I dug deep, fixed bugs, rebuilt the testing pipeline, documented the undocumented. I didn't just write code, I translated chaos into clarity. Other devs started coming to me, not just for help, but for decisions. I kept thinking about the bootcamp, about how much I'd learned, despite it. Not because it was good, but because I refused to let it break me. There's a certain power in surviving the furnace. You learn to stop fearing the fire. One Thursday, I was invited to an internal panel on leadership. I almost said no. Thought maybe someone else deserved the mic this time. But Priya insisted. They need to hear from someone who's earned it the hard way. I walked into the room and froze. There in the back row, Josh. He was in a hoodie, hunched over. Not the same swaggering guy from bootcamp. I hadn't seen him since the demo day disaster. For a second, I almost let it shake me. Then I remembered the late nights, the unfinished tea, my daughter's sleepy hug after my first paycheck cleared. So I spoke. Not like a leader, like a survivor. I told them about the night I rewrote the app, about the smirks, the silence, the moment I chose to rebuild instead of retreat. And I watched their faces shift, not with pity, but recognition. After the panel, Josh approached me. "Hey," he said, eyes on the floor. "I heard you were here. I didn't expect—" He paused. "Actually, I did. You always had grit." I tilted my head. "That what they call it now?" He laughed, but it was small, real. "I was an ass," he said. "You didn't deserve that." I shrugged. "You were the system. I just debugged it." He smiled, brief, sheepish. "You hiring?" I didn't answer. Just sipped my water and walked away. Because sometimes closure isn't a conversation. It's a full circle moment you don't need to explain. Months passed. Promotions came. I got invited to speak at conferences. Not flashy ones, grassroots ones, where people wore secondhand hoodies and asked real questions. I told them the truth. That being underestimated is a strange gift. That silence isn't weakness, it's strategy. That sometimes the only way forward is through a door you build yourself, out of code and resolve and too many sleepless nights. At one of those events, a teenage girl waited until everyone had left before walking up to me. She had braces, a trembling notebook, and eyes too old for her age. "I don't think I belong," she whispered. "They don't take me seriously." I looked at her hands, ink-stained, nail-bitten, the same kind I used to hide. "They laughed at me once too," I said. "Then I rewrote the whole system, not just the app, the expectation." She blinked. "How?" I smiled. One keystroke at a time. That night, I sat in my tiny flat, still cluttered with sticky notes and charging cables, and stared at the line of code glowing on my screen. It was elegant, efficient, mine. And in that moment, I felt something I hadn't in years. Not pride, not relief, but peace. Because I'd stopped asking permission, stopped waiting to be invited. I was building things now, fixing things, leading. And I wasn't alone anymore. Sasha and I launched a mentorship group, informal, scrappy, full of late-night Zoom calls and bug bounties. We called it Silent Syntax, because the best code doesn't shout. It just works. And so do we. The woman they laughed at in boot camp, she never really left. She just leveled up. So if you're watching this thinking you don't belong, let me tell you something they won't. You don't need to fit. You need to function. You don't need to match their energy. You need to move the needle. And if they won't give you a seat at the table, build your own. With cleaner code, stronger logic, and a damn good story. Because in the end, the system didn't break me. I refactored it, and then I shipped it.